Welcome to our one of our work of the working group session. This is our REA working group on adolescent girls and faith formation. So I want to introduce you to our three speakers. They are Cindy Cameron. Cindy holds the Patrick and Barbara Keenan Chair in Religious Education and is Associate Professor of Religious Education at the Regis St. Michael's Faculty of Theology at the University of St. Michael's College in the University of Toronto. Her research focuses on female adolescents, theological anthropology, and Catholic schooling. Lakisha Lockhart is another author of the title that we're going to be talking about. She's Associate Professor of Christian Education at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Richmond, Virginia. Her research interests are in religious education, practical liberation and womanist theologies, embodied faith and pedagogies, and theopoetics, creativity, imagination, and play. And then finally, our third author is Emily Peck. She's visiting professor of Christian formation and young adult ministries at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. She's also the co-director of the Hub for Collaborative and Imaginative Ministry and the co-director of the Children and Youth Ministry and Advocacy Certificate Program. This is the book, if you can, well, it's maybe a little hard to see. It's called Nobody's Perfect, Redefining Sin and Mistakes in Adolescent Christian Education. And there's a link in the chat if you're interested in purchasing a copy of the book. You can just go right to that link. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our authors.
Thank you, Jen. We are aware that we are not the only working group that has come together to produce a book, but we're really excited about the opportunity to share about our process. And maybe it's different in some ways than other working groups and the books that they have come out with. I think part of that is likely because literally everyone involved in writing this book and in the working group at the time are or were junior scholars during the work of it. So we are kind of the you go from your student gatherings at REA to your junior scholars working group, so that's just how it turned out. But we think that this book came from the working group in a really I don't know, like a really grassroots kind of way. Like the idea for it came out of conversation in the working group. And this was at the REA meeting of 2018, which for those of you who were around at that point, it happened near Washington, D.C. Not in Washington, D.C., but near Washington, D.C. And it happened right after Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed by the U.S. Senate to be a justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. And at that time, I was the chair of the Adolescent Girls Faith Formation Working Group. And we gathered, I think it was over a meal, and we were kind of stunned. And all of us came with this question of how are we supposed to support the faith formation of adolescent girls when in this country, someone who assaulted adolescent girls was passed through to the highest court in the nation. And moreover, where we saw the courage of a woman coming out before the Senate with all of the attention that comes with that in the news and the media and the social media and everyone's opinions about everything, saw her courage in coming out and speaking the truth of what had happened to her and being told very clearly that that wasn't enough to bar the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. So we were in Washington, D.C., dealing with this news that had just broken, I think, a couple weeks before REA gathered. And we were just saying, this guy, we're saying that the nation, the narrative is that he was a guy who made some teenage mistakes. And this is a narrative that gets told for teenage boys all the time when they are white, that they are allowed to make youthful mistakes, no matter the harm that they cause others, no matter the harm that they cause girls, and it doesn't stop them from having a very successful life. Supreme Court justice being, one of the most successful positions politically and in the legal system in this country. And so this question of, well, then how come other kids, when they make mistakes, lose their lives for it? Key in our minds at that point were young Black boys. And there's no wiggle room, right? There's no space to make mistakes. A mistake is deadly. And we were thinking specifically about Tamir Rice at this point. But our question was, what's happening with our kids? How do they narrate this? What theological language do they have in their faith communities, in their religious schools that will help them to figure out if what they are doing in their life is a mistake, or is it the category of sin? Are they sinning? Are they making mistake? How do they wrestle with the ideas that some kids can make mistakes and others can't? And what can we do to help those who work directly with young people to help them navigate this? So that's sort of the impetus of the book. And then what I think we found is that it was this conversation in the working group showed us what a generative space being together with other scholars who are wrestling with the same questions can be. We all came with a similar question. We were not all from the same place and all had the same question because of our shared interest in the faith formation of this particular part of the population. So we found it to be a really generative space. And as I had said, these were all junior scholars. And that's just how it shook out. There were other senior scholars who are a part of the group who weren't there for that conversation, but who have been there for others. It's just that particular conversation, we were all junior scholars. So I'm going to pause and hand it over to Lakisha and Cindy to continue the conversation about sort of the process about how this book came about. So our plan is to share our story and to share with you some challenges that we came up against and some particular benefits that we found from working as a collective, as a collaborative group, and then some key things that we have learned through the process. And then our hope is that you folks might have some questions about this kind of work from a generative space of collective people around a certain idea or question to a book that is now in our hands.
So after the that meeting at the working group that Emily described, we all a bunch of us got together to kind of try and figure out what kind of process we wanted and what kind of product we thought we might want. And even at this point, the product itself was a little bit not set in stone, although we knew we wanted to speak to fellow religious educators as we did this. And I think the earliest formation of the editorial group was me, Emily, and Jennifer Moe, who is here with us today. And what we did, and Emily and Jen, you can correct me if my memory is wrong. What we did is we reached out to everybody who was part of that conversation, plus other folks who were part of the working group and weren't there for the conversation, explained the rationale, and invited people to submit an idea for a chapter in a book. We asked that people, at this point, we asked that people submit chapters proposing work that involved empirical research of some sort. We wanted to hear the voices of kids. As much as possible, we wanted to privilege the voices of kids, and particularly the voices of marginalized kids. So Black kids, girls, gay kids, all kids who were marginalized in some way. And we wanted to hear them directly and not just talk about them. Because there's a lot of really great religious education resources to talk about kids, but we wanted to be more in the genre of privileging those voices of kids. And I think in that we got, I don't know, 9 or so chapters. And that was a bit of a moving target. People came, people left, people got busy and had to drop out. We invited other people along the way. It was a pretty fluid group. And everyone was thinking about doing some sort of empirical research. And then COVID came. In all of the ways that COVID derailed all of our academic lives, it made it even more difficult to do the kind of empirical research with kids. Ethics review boards at universities were essentially shut down for 6 months to a year. People weren't meeting. Youth groups weren't meeting in person. Teachers in Catholic schools were overwhelmed by just teaching and could not even imagine organizing a focus group with kids. Like, it just stalled us in our tracks. So it was probably, what do you think? Late 2021, early 2022, when we finally started kind of regrouping and getting chapters from people. And that's when the real work started for us as editors. Keisha, do you want to talk a little bit about that process?
Sure. Thank you. Jennifer, feel free to jump in. As you mentioned, she was part of the original group of editors of the three. And then there was a kind of a transition point where it was an ask of, hey, would you want to be an editor on this? And part of my yes was the care and intentionality, not just with, I knew the work was going to be important regardless, right? Like that was always going to be the case. And I was always going to be a contributor, no matter what. But the ask was also very intentional because it was, we want representation, right? That mattered. The intentionality of saying, hey, we realize how important that is. And would you consider, like coming on and being a part of putting this together so that we're having other eyes on things from other experiences, from other things that we might not have that we see in different ways. And so I was just really honored and excited to join and to be a part of that. And I just think that spoke a lot about, in particular, everyone, but just especially these three colleagues of mine, to say, no, this was something that mattered to us and that we wanted to be intentional about. And so from there, we really just started just talking about like how we want to look at this as editors, right? Realizing that the beauty of having three editors is that everyone can do a part, right? Everyone doesn't have to do all the things all the time, which is the beautiful part of having three. And so we put together a system where we put the book into 3 parts, I think, at that time. It wasn't as fleshed out as the book you have in front of you, but we knew they were like 3 sections-ish that we kind of grouped things in. And then from there, we would have a kind of a primary editor for each section because there were 3 of us. So there'd be a primary editor and then a secondary editor for each section. And so we kind of just shift. And then we did this kind of throughout, from the first drafts to the second and then to the final drafts, right? So we would switch each section. Well, each section would still have the main person, but then we'd kind of switch the secondary person that would have the different eyes on it. And we usually tried to let it be the person that was also in that particular section, because it just so happened to work out that the 3 of us were each in the 3 sections. It worked out so beautifully in this way. And so then it was like we were kind of over our own section, but secondary on another section as well. So we could also feel the rhythm of the book. We could feel the pieces. We could feel who was talking across the books. How can we make it more explicit? How can we not? And so that was a really beautiful part of the process. And then also working with other folks to get their work in, and having to, I think, also navigate the pieces of, okay, we need front end stuff, we need back end stuff, who's going to do. So having to also think through that, how we wanted to reach out to people, and what that might look like, and also making sure we went through the peer review process at Fortress, which was really important to us for their feedback and, just also credibility in the field. Yeah, and then just working with other editors, kind of just, I think, not editors, but authors. I think one of the things we learned, is, sometimes it takes a while. The good and the bad of all of it is when you're working with other people, timelines are different. So, and I know we'll get into a little bit more like the challenges in a little bit, but I think just process as editors is we always kind of make sure we got together. We, doubled each other's stuff, so no one person was doing any one thing. And then we always kind of kept coming back. We made sure our feedback loop with Fortress was there. And we always kind of made sure that we were in sync and that we felt good, and we had meetings when we needed to. We stayed in touch. We had our group text. We had all the things that were going on, including the email once all the books came in, the text when all the books came in, and we're like sending emojis. So it was also just kind of this start to finish beautiful moment.
I think one of the things, sorry. One of the things that made a big difference for us was, like Keisha said, the three of us, and Jen when she was a part as well, our intention was always that the editorial process was always going to be collaborative, that we were going to prioritize collaboration, both on our editorial team, but also with our contributing authors. We wanted this to be as collaborative as we could make it. It was not as collaborative as we might have dreamed for it to be, but we wanted it to be really, really to embody kind of the nature of the working group itself, which was sharing ideas, supporting each other in our scholarship. We also have to mention the incredible support that we got from a number of senior scholars along the way, and particularly very early in the process. And in particularly Dory Baker and Almeda Wright, who gave us a lot of really great advice on how to manage the process. And in particular, I think it was Almeda who recommended to us that we have a completed first draft of the book before we started approaching potential publishers. And what this meant was that we had a really clear idea of what the book was when we went to the publisher. We weren't tentative, like, this is what we hope for, this is what's, this is the idea that we have in mind. It's like, we have a book, it has 9 chapters, these are the chapters. And that really helped us articulate in the proposal process what our book was, who our book was speaking to and for. And it allowed us to craft a narrative around why some things were not included. So we have 3 chapters in the book, 3 chapters in the book that deal with adolescent girls. And from several publishers, including Fortress, we got feedback like, well, why don't you include a chapter on boys? And we said no. Not because boys are unimportant, not because boys don't face challenges in our contemporary society, but because we didn't want to, we wanted to privilege the voices of adolescent girls in a particular way, in a way that their voices are often not privileged, where girls get lumped in with adolescents in general, where the boy stands in as the stereotypical adolescent. We wanted girls to stand in that space for a little while in our book. Now, there were some additions, some pieces that we wanted to add that we weren't able to. So we wanted to add a chapter on adolescent mistake making and the use of technology. And in the timeline that we had, we weren't able to find an author that was going to be able to contribute a chapter like that. But we did, we wanted to, the whole middle section of the book deals with LGBTQIA kids. And we wanted to beef that up. And so we approached a couple of additional authors on that. So like that whole collaborative nature of it helped us have this unified product that didn't change very much once it entered the publication production pipeline.
Jen, we gave you a heads up before this conversation began in hopes that you might represent some of the other authors who were in the book who were not editors. And so we wanted to just give you the opportunity to share a little bit about what the process was like for you as a contributing author, knowing that in particular your experience was different because you started out as part of the editorial team itself.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to. Well, first of all, I want to say that this came about because of a working group. And I know that we've established that at the beginning, of course, but to anybody who might be here or might be listening later, I don't know that I would be as involved and active and benefiting from my membership in the Religious Education Association without this working group. So I was interested in adolescent girls and faith formation, saw that there was a working group, didn't know Emily at all. And I just decided to show up at, I think the first meeting of the working group that I went to was in St. Louis, maybe. And I was, like we've noted, junior scholar, still, I think I was writing my dissertation maybe at that time. And it was, for any of you also who have been PhD students or are PhD students in the Religious Education Association, you know what I mean when I say I was writing my dissertation and somebody at REA could have given a plenary talk on like solving all of the world's problems, and I would have said, I don't care, I'm focused on my dissertation. It was that meeting of the adolescent girls and faith formation working group that made it worth my travel and time to be there. Not that everything else wasn't wonderful, but those connections that we made and the conversations that we had were so incredible. And so that was when I got solidified in terms of my desire to really be involved with REA and not just come to meetings every now and then or whatever, but to really be involved. And so I just want to add that to the conversation. And then yeah, I remember the conversation well, where we were talking about like, do you think we could write, like, do you think we could publish something with all of these ideas that we all have? And we were talking about all of the things that kind of wound up in the book eventually, and all the different perspectives that folks had on it. And so I wrote in an area that's of particular interest to me, which is the kind of materials that are created that are meant to educate and inform within religious education. And so it was a fun project in that way, and also disheartening because if you read my chapter, you'll see that I was quite disappointed with many of the materials that I read and where they stood in terms of the topic of sin and mistake making. And there are two things that stick out to me that are part of the process that were so helpful as a junior scholar and as somebody who had not up until that point published anything more than like a contribution to a devotional when I was in my 20s or something. I got to be part of at the beginning, and I'm not sure if Lakisha and I had overlapped at this point or not. So the beginning where we actually met with someone from Augsburg Fortress on a Zoom call and talked about what does it mean to do a proposal? Should we just send in the chapters that we have, you know, this whole idea of determining, do we need to write a proposal first, or should we do this everybody bring it all together and we just got a book to propose, all of that kind of stuff. That was something I didn't know I could do and didn't know without the outside help of some folks saying like, oh, I know somebody at Augsburg Fortress, or I know somebody at this other publisher who might be interested. And then the second thing that sticks out to me is the incredible editor at Augsburg that took what I wrote. Her name is Yvonne Hawkins. Took what I wrote and made it 1,000 times better. And I'm still amazed at, you know, you write something and you think of course it makes perfect sense to everybody who reads it. And then an editor takes a look at it, like one who's not you know, Cindy and Emily and Lakisha had a process of bringing all the book together, but I mean an editor from a publisher whose job is to go through it like word by word and say, what are you talking about? What does this mean? I don't understand. Remove this because it's superfluous. You mentioned this here, but you never come back to it. All of these incredible things. I just now I read the chapter I wrote and I think, wow, it would not have been as good as it is without that editor. So Yvonne Hawkins is not here, but shout out to her at Fortress.
Thank you so much. I do think that it's worth mentioning that part of our commitment as an editorial team for this was that we wanted to, it was great to have people to navigate this process with, because I had published with the Horizons series for REA, but like all of this was new to all of us, and we had company on this journey of like not knowing exactly what we're doing, and that was really, really helpful. I also think that it's very cool that Yvonne was part of a team that I worked with a local church who was reconfiguring their whole Christian education curriculum before she even went to Fortress. And so she's someone who also knows like Christian education and helped a church envision lifelong faith formation from the beginning through creating curriculum for their entire church. So we really found a wonderful publisher, a wonderful editor to work with. It is, however, important to talk about the challenges. Yay, we have a book. We love it. The cover is great, and we were not sure I think we were all kind of nervous about what kind of cover would come, but yay, we have this book. And it's easy to like stop there and just celebrate. And we think it's important to talk about the challenges too, because it is hard. And when you're a junior scholar and you don't have an in and you don't know exactly what you're doing, it can feel really insurmountable. Being part of this guild was really helpful. We had a call with Almeida, and she gave us a list of like, these are publishers who might be interested. Start with this one, then move on to this one. And actually, Fortress was our fourth. I think the other day we counted up. I think we decided this was our fourth publisher. But as soon as they saw it, they were like, this is fabulous. We want this. And we were like, okay. But I didn't know that like when someone tells you no, that doesn't necessarily mean no. That means go find someone who's going to say yes. And we had a list of people who we could contact instead of like Googling who should I reach out to? Like, we had something to start from, and that was really important. One of the things that we heard repeatedly in those no's was that publishers don't want to publish edited volumes. And we even heard that from Fortress, but what they said was the difference is that this really is a collaborative work. And you are telling a story that is important, and all of it goes together in a really important way. And I wouldn't call this an edited volume. I would call this a collective work. And I think that's part of what came out of it starting in a working group is it really came from a question that we had together as a collective. And I think that's the only reason that it's able to be a collected volume when nobody wants an edited volume of essays. So it took us 4 tries. Don't give up. And the advice to learn how to narrate it is really important.
I'll jump in for a minute just to talk because I was hitting on it a little bit earlier, and I'll let Cindy come in and talk about like the narrating, the kind of the tenure promotion piece of some of this. But I just wanted to talk about the challenge of corralling folks and timeline. So I'm a big person like where I want to have like dates in the calendar. I want to have like deadline. I want to have things to hit. But as they say, life is lifing, and it's not just you, but it's not just your life that things happen to and that things, get off track or you miss a day or two, but also you have now this whole group of authors whose lives are also lifing and things are happening. And so it's like now taking that into consideration. So where you're like, okay, I can get this in a day or two. Someone else needs 2 weeks. Someone else needs this other thing came up. And so it's how do you like doing this dance of how do you show grace, right? But also we have to get these pages in. Like we have to show grace, but also if you don't turn this draft in, then the 2 of us that are like trying to give you feedback won't have time to give you feedback, right? Or we're gonna have to like rush the feed. And like so it's one of those things like we had to really do the dance of balance of, hey, we need to do this. So I think like once we started realizing that, I think we ended up like giving people earlier dates so that we would give ourselves more time. So we'd be like, okay, well, this is the date we actually need it by. So let's tell them 2 weeks before that. So that way, by the time it comes, it'll actually be on time. So just being really honest about that around everyone's not going to hit every deadline. And if you want a little bit more grace, you also have to create that space. So give yourself that 2 week, and they don't have to know, but you need to know, especially if you still have the deadline. And I think I'm not sure if there weren't, but people, they were like, hey, I just don't think I'm going to get this in. And we're just like, when you get to a certain point, you just have to be like, okay, like maybe there will be another volume you could be a part of, but like we have to continue on. So there just has to be a lot of that, but just it's a delicate balance because these are also colleagues and these are relationships and these are people whose work we know needs to be in this volume. Like it's amazing and wonderful work, and also we need it to like be published soon. So we need to have things finished. So just making sure you do that dance. I will say it helped having 3 folks because it's like one person would be like, hey, here's the deadline. And then when they did the next person, hey, we still haven't heard from you. So it wasn't like, it felt like one person was just doing all the the nagging, but it felt like we kind of alternated when we all kind of were like, had to, I guess, good parent, bad parent, like had to do all right, it's time. So that was also really nice, not having to just be the one person that did all the things. But that was definitely a unique challenge that if you do take on an edited volume is something that you have to consider, that you do want to make sure your relationships remain intact after this process. So just keep that in mind.
And the other challenge that Lakisha and I were in particular navigating, as were several of our collaborating authors, is the way in which this volume fit into our tenure processes. For both Keisha and myself, and I think at least 2 or 3 of the other contributing authors, having a peer-reviewed book on our CVs that could be evaluated by our tenure committees was really, really important. And one of the things that was beautiful about the process with Fortress is that they understood that. When we said this is, that Lakisha and I were going up for tenure in 2024, 2025, Yvonne, our editor, was like, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to get it through peer review. This is how we're going to get it, a PDF copy of it to you so you can share it with your tenure committees. This is the letter I'm going to write for you. And these were all things that we didn't know that publishers could do for us in terms of supporting our own kind of professional milestones and professional needs. And so, one of the learnings was like not to be afraid to ask the publisher if they can, what they can do to help you with things beyond the book. The other thing was, of course, as part of the publishing process, we had, in addition to providing them with a list of people who could peer review the book, we also had to, or were invited to, provide them with lists of people who could blurb the book. In other words, all those folks who wrote the really lovely things on the back cover of our book. And so some of whom are here in this room, looking at you, Joyce and Mary. And one of the things that we learned in that process was how very generous more senior scholars are. Now we don't know how we know how long the list was. We don't know how many people Yvonne ended up asking, but we have what, 6 or 7 different folks who are all significant senior scholars in the field, who were willing to read our book and give positive feedback on it. And that is, in addition to being really, really helpful, was really, really gratifying to know that the work that we were doing as junior scholars resonated with people who had been in this field for more years than we have. And how generous folks just were with, not just feedback and blurbing, but also when we asked Patrick Reyes and Almeda Wright to write the foreword and the post, whatever it's called, epilogue, for the book, and we asked them, and both of them said yes immediately. Just that process of asking folks seems really intimidating, and it wasn't. And people were so incredibly generous with their time.
Yeah, I won't lie. I totally cried when I read the preface and the epilogue and saw the blurbs. Like all of us were like in our editorial, we were like, oh my God, did you read this yet? I don't even know what, I think gratifying is a good word, but it doesn't capture the like emotional, oh my gosh, these people think that what we did was good. Like, I feel like that's something that we don't talk about, right, as junior scholars. And as I joined this organization when I was a student too, so I don't know, the imposter syndrome that, let's name it, right, that we often pretend doesn't exist, but it's there. And to be, it felt really, really good to have the support of these senior scholars. So we've shared about the process, we've shared about the challenges, and now we're getting into sharing about the benefits. Because it is true for those of you who face tenure committees that a collected volume doesn't count as much as an individual book does. And I think that as people who have been in REA for several years, we have talked about things like post-colonialism, and we have talked about things like white normativity, and we have talked about things about how those work in like the system of academia, and maybe not head on, but it's always kind of like there on the sidelines of the conversations that we have. And so I think it's important that we be able to narrate the benefits of doing a work like this, because academia will tell you not to bother because it doesn't count on your CV, right? Academia will say you should spend your time doing this and this so that you can get to tenure. Well, many of us, myself included, are probably not going to get tenure anytime in our careers, right? It's disappearing. Institutions are having folks retire, and they are not replacing them with tenure track. Those budget lines are gone. Cindy and Lakisha, you're like, like at the tail end of it, maybe. And that's not true everywhere, and it's not true in every institution, but these trends are happening across academia. So in some ways, this gives us permission to say, well, academia might say it doesn't count, but we say it does, and to be able to narrate why that is. So what we found as particular benefits, I'll share a couple, and then we'll, go on to pass it along so that other folks on the editorial team can share. But one of the things that I found through this process is that collaboration is better than doing individual work. It just is. There are more brains, more perspectives, more insights, more experiences in a collaborative work than in an individual work. If you do your individual work, and I'm not saying those aren't important, but you do your individual work and it goes out in the world, and then you're going to hear about it in book reviews, or somebody's going to write about it in their dissertation, or it's going to show up in someone else's book as they are like, wait a second, you missed this. In a collaborative work, there are things that I couldn't write about when it came to this topic that other people could, and I didn't have to wait for them to come later, right? They're in the same book as me. We get to talk to each other, and the perspectives make the book richer. Having more brains in the room, the Zoom room, in the book room, is better. And I think it is important to go against academic individualism and autonomy. It is important for us to say that this work doesn't actually have to be done alone. We don't have to try to get out in front of other people. We actually can do better when we work together. Striving for advancement is not what our vocations are, right? Our vocations are to teach. Our vocations are to use the brains that God gives us. What I tell my students is that my vocation is to help them to live out their vocation. And I do that better when I am working with other people, not thinking only of myself.
And I'll add on to that really quickly, is that for me, this is also a very much like liberationist practices, very womanist practices, right? Like this is community. This is like communal engagement, what it means to do work communally, and to realize that we're made better together through these voices. I mean, just thinking about the process of what was written and reading each other's work, we inspired and influenced each other throughout the work, like reading certain things like, oh, I didn't know that was the case, right? My chapter focused a lot on, Black and brown bodies and what that meant. And not everyone identified as having a Black and brown body. And yet it was still this really powerful conversation we got to have around, oh, what this looks like and what this means. So it's making us better educators. It's making us better people. Together, because we're engaging. We're not just staying in the silos. We're not just saying, oh, we're saying, again, we can have these conversations and be better together, not just in this book, because now this book is this communal work that is made good, but in this world, in the work that we're called to, we're better educators, we're better people, we're better parents, just all of the things, right? Better partners, whatever it might be, because we now know of other people's experiences. We now the way that it works when you learn about other experiences, when you travel, when you do all of these things, it's made better. If we're just also going to talk about, because I know some of you that if you're not feeling the warm and fuzzy about community, let's also talk about, when you have more people involved, that's more reach when it comes to selling books, right? Like if we also want to put that out there, right? Like if that's what gets you going, you want to know about the sales. That's also something to consider, is that you know, I am one person and I have my community, but when we have 9 or so people in this and everybody has their own community, you have more people that are, oh, well, just because I know that, or I know them, and now they're posting, they're putting this up, and they're using kind of our bandwidth is much stronger, and our reach begins to grow much further when more people are involved. And so I just think it reaches more people, it affects, it impacts more folks. Just like our hope is that it should be, because this is about young people and all of them deserve to know that they are wonderful and good and amazing, full stop. Right. And so the more that we can get that out is good. So I just wanted to throw those 2 things in there. And I know Cindy can you're going to bring up the rest.
Can I interrupt real fast just because you brought up book sales? We also, in honoring and respecting the fact that this came out of a working group, you know, Fortress came to us with our contract and said that they would do, oh gosh, I can't remember what it was. They would do like 9% or something, and then we would divide it between the 3 of us. And we said, no, we want 12% so that we can also give an equal share back to the organization. So in honor of the fact that this is not just the work of the 3 of us and that it came out of REA, those book sales are going back into REA.
One other thing that was really a huge benefit for me was, in addition to the collaboration that both Emily and Lakisha have described, is that this was a collaboration amongst junior scholars, which changed the dynamic in some ways. You know, if we had been an editorial team with, say, 1 senior scholar and 2 junior scholars, that's a very different dynamic. If this had been an edited volume that had been frontlined by Tom Groom or whoever, you know, that would have been great. But having the 3 of us as junior scholars, as 3 women, as 2 white women and a woman of color, right? Those things mattered. They mattered to us, and I think they matter to the people that we want to be in conversation with, and they matter to the kids. You know, that you don't have to be the fancy person to have something important to say, that representation matters, that speaking from your personal experience matters. And so that whole dynamic for me was just one of the things that I really, really benefited from throughout the whole process.
I think the last thing, unless I missed it because there was some background noise. If you saw me duck away, it's because I accidentally turned on my paper shredder. So you could have said it and I didn't hear it. The paper shredder is now off. This is what happens when you're, you know, Zooming from home. But the other thing that we found as particularly beneficial to our conglomeration, our collaboration, is that it is a really ecumenical piece of work that you know, there aren't actually that many things that are written by Catholics and Protestants and non-denominational folks all in the same place. And I think that adds to the richness of it, which isn't to say that like there aren't peoples and groups and topics that, you know, we still see our holes that we wish were in there and aren't, right? But just to say that doing something this ecumenical is a gift, I think, too, of it coming out of the working group of REA. So at this point, I think that is what we had planned to share about the process, the challenges, the benefits, and the learnings along the way. So we are hopeful now that you will enter the conversation, and Jen will turn the MC power over to you.
Thank you. Yes, I invite you to ask questions. Either probably the best way to do it is to raise your hand, either physically if we can see you, or raise your hand using the kind of react buttons at the bottom. You can also put a question in the chat, and I am happy to read that to our authors. I did notice that there's a couple of things in the chat. Mary has said a couple of things. Mary says, unless Mary, would you like to read them yourself?
Yeah, sure. I was responding to two things that you'd said. The first was the whole question about tenure issues. And I think one of the things I've thought about a lot is that there are a number of us who now hold positions in the academy as deans, not me, but as deans or other kinds of things where we should be advocating for understanding what contributes to a tenure decision in ways that value the very things you've pointed out, right? I mean, I think that that's part of what we have to do when we're mid-career or later to help our colleagues understand what our field is. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing was just thanks for thinking about sending something back to REA. I really appreciate a very concrete, yeah, just thanks to all of you. I mean, I think the book itself is fabulous, as you know, because I blurbed it, but I love the fact that you thought about the economic realities. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mary. Noel, go ahead and unmute yourself, and if you can hear me. Noel, go ahead.
Who did you say? Oh, all right. Thank you.
Oh, is it Noel or Noel?
Either one.
Okay.
It
Go
depends
ahead,
if I live in an area in Canada where there are a number of people also called Noah. So if I want to emphasize that I'm Noel Schul, then that's when it becomes more French than just plain Noel. So, however, I was wondering, this goes into details in the actual project work. Did you make any use of one or another of a cloud in your collective work over a period of a couple of years? It sounded like. So another question, but I would like to hear about the cloud and to what extent it was useful and which cloud you use and that kind of thing.
We are, we did not go high tech with this. We just used Google Docs and Google folders. And so all the way along, any document that we were writing together was a Google Doc. And any folder into which we were collecting chapters was a folder in a Google file, so that we could all have access to everything all the time in real time. And we found that to be a really effective way of sharing things and communicating with one another. We also had a really long text.
Mm-hmm.
We have a
Did you
group
run
text
into
that yeah, for years and years and years. So
I will say too that I think if I were to do this now, I would use something more secure than Google Drive. We know that Google mines for data. There wasn't anything in there, none of our IRB stuff was in there, for example. But I do think that we would use something more secure now, and knowing the realities of what's that academic AI thing that's stealing all of our works? I can't remember. It has like some book reviews that I've written, and it doesn't have anything from this. But at any rate, that Google Docs is not secure, and I think that if we were to do it again, we would. My institution has a secure cloud now, which it did not have when we started this in 2018. Well, maybe it did, not to the extent that it does now, at any rate.
And did you have another question, Noel?
It was touched on by the last speaker.
Oh, okay.
Emily, yes. Okay.
Okay, great.
And that is it. In light of the theme of our conference this year, any use or extensive use of any aspect of AI, which is quite a broad perspective now.
not intentionally by any of the three of us. You know, we don't have windows into our contributing authors. I don't know. Emily, do you have, or Keisha, thoughts on AI? It really wasn't a thing. Like it's one, the use of artificial intelligence, particularly in academia, has really only been a thing for what, like 3 years? And most of the book was written by that time, quite honestly. So it's not something that entered into our imagination.
It didn't enter into, but I will say I do wish we had gotten a chapter about it. Like I think like having something in there because I think youth are very affected by it. But like, you know, like we did try. That was something we we did try. This timeline wouldn't allow. I thinking about it now, thinking about how it's used now. I know friends that like try to use it like just when they're getting an outline together or getting something like that, and then maybe we could have thought about certain things and had more time to work on things. So maybe it could have been something that could have been helpful when you use it more as a tool, right? Like I'm thinking about it like that. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's a good question, but I think we were right there kind of on the cusp before it really just boomed. So
Thank you. Joyce.
In looking ahead,
Oh,
in
sorry,
looking ahead
Joyce.
to future writing, do you plan to involve AI, aspects of AI more in your composition of writing or in your writing? I've run into, for example, a person creates a chapter and then submits it to an AI agent for copy editing. So there is a text existing, but improvements could be made. And that's one of the aspects, I think, of legitimate use of AI for copy editing of one's compositions.
I will admit to relying on this conference right now to help me think through this more. I'm very anxious about it. I'm anxious about my intellectual property being out there as part of AI's, knowledge feed. So I don't know. That's my answer. Uh, we'll see. It's really hard to get away from now. You Google anything and there's an AI something, it comes up without you asking for it. So I'm glad that this is our theme this year, and I'll let you know in a year.
Joyce.
Thanks and congratulations to you all.
Now, how about, y'all, this has been a tremendously fun conversation to listen in on, and partly because I've followed your development of this along the way and, heard some of the early musings in a meeting we had at a funny cafeteria table at one of the conferences way back whenever. And, I just remember those moments, and the development of this has been great and such a good thing that you have done. And I just wanted to comment on two things. One is about content, and the other one is about publication and process. The content one is that the comment about getting pushback to include a chapter on boys, I'm so grateful to you that you resisted that. Not because I have anything against boys. I have two boy children of my own. I like boys. That's not the issue, but right now in so many ways we are being asked to fold up and stick in a drawer our concerns for the advocacy of specific peoples and groups and all over the place, all different situations. And I think where we can say that stops here, we don't have a problem wanting everybody to have equity, but it is a problem for equity when we cannot speak in relation to the particular needs of any one group within that. So I'm just grateful to you all that you did not cave, because I think the academic push right now is heavy in that direction. And started a few years ago, even though we're seeing the fruition of it so much right now. The second thing that I wanted to comment on is the process of getting over imposter syndrome in relation to publishing can be a lot about figuring out that, everybody who ever writes something puts their pants on exactly the same way. That people who are authors started out not knowing stuff. And that, all of us are always
You're freezing up a little bit, Joyce. Seems we've lost Joyce for a second here.
read a manuscript, or whether it's for a journal like Religious Education, where you're invited to read and review a manuscript. Because when you do that, you put yourself in the shoes of readers and editors. And so you implicitly learn how those people think about the writing that's in front of them, which is then a tool that you have that I think demystifies things quite a lot. At least that's been my experience. And so I'm just sort of picking up that thread of your conversation and adding my 2 cents for it to it. No real question here, just a couple comments. Thanks.
Thanks so much for that, Joyce. Particularly the affirmation that we made a good choice in sticking to our guns. For me, in terms of imposter syndrome, which never goes away, like that never ever goes away. But in terms of imposter syndrome, the thing that made a big difference to me was a conversation that I had with a rep for a publisher at a conference, where they said to me, we need books to publish. Like our whole business model is built on publishing books, right? So it's, for me, it was that realization that I'm not going begging to publishers. Please, sir, won't you publish my book? That it's a mutually beneficial relationship of finding the right publisher and the right book at the right time and the right authors, right? But it's a mutually beneficial relationship where I get my voice out there, our voices out there, and they have books to publish to make money off of, right? Like it's a mutually beneficial thing. So.
Joyce, I wanted to add that for me, at least, you cut out for a little bit there. And I wasn't sure if you were mentioning it sounded like maybe you were talking about the process of being able to read other people's submissions. I want to add that at one point, I was invited to be a peer reviewer for the RE Journal, which Joyce is the editor of. And I have benefited tremendously from being invited to do that, to be a peer reviewer myself, because then I've seen other people's works come in and have read them and kind of compared them. Sometimes I'll get 2 or 3 to look at once, and have been able to compare them. And in the comparison, being able to see like, oh, I think this would be really good if they could add a little bit more about this or something like that, like getting my own opportunity to review things. So I'll just say that has been really valuable to me as well as when I've done RIG presentations here at REA and have submitted those for publication into the journal, and getting the feedback that says, this is why we're not going to put it in the journal. And so that also all of that is helpful. And so again, if you're a student here on the call or listening, the Religious Education Association has so many opportunities for you to practice, to try some things out, to submit some things and get feedback, and perhaps write some book reviews for the journal, and then perhaps even do some peer reviewing. All of these opportunities are available to you. So I want to add that. Do we have any other questions? I know that I thought of something while you guys were talking, and it comes from my experience, and then perhaps will come from yours too. But when I got the book in the mail and I, started reading it, and of course went, right to my chapter. What does it look like in here? All of that stuff. I read it and I thought, oh gosh, I wish I could keep adding to it because of the world that we're in now, and the stuff that I wrote about in here now seems dated, and yet not at all, because of some new emphases on traditional roles for women and such, and the ways that young women are being trained up into those roles. I wondered if you had the same experience upon reading your chapter once you saw it in print.
So my chapter started out as a paper for our meeting. I can't remember what year. um, but at the time that I started writing it, I was looking at kind of my question that I came with was, what do youth who are in reconciling, which is the United Methodist Church language for open and affirming of full inclusion of LGBTQ plus people in the life of the church, what do youth who are in reconciling congregations think about their denomination continuing to be exclusionary of these folks? And in particular, I was thinking about the fact that many of our youth are going through confirmation and are deciding whether they're going to join the denomination or not. And, when you're in a denomination, you're not only joining the local church, you're joining the whole denomination. And even if your local church is open and affirming or reconciling, the denomination itself isn't at that point. And I had to keep updating that article that became a chapter because of things happening in the United Methodist Church. And for those of you who don't know, now there has been a splinter group of more conservative churches off of the United Methodist Church that is the Global Methodist Church, and then many United Methodist churches who are now independent churches. And if you're looking at the electoral map of the United States, there are more churches who left the United Methodist denomination in the red states than in the blue states. And I would love to do a follow-up on that. I would love to know now that, what I kind of ended my chapter on this hopeful note of this young person who's queer who said, I'm sticking with the United Methodist Church despite the mistakes that it has made, which I would call sins of exclusion. And that I'm ready to help build whatever it is that comes next. And so like it ends with this like, okay, now we're a couple years after that. What are we? How do you think about the church now? Now that some folks have left and some folks have stayed, and your participation in denominational things looks different. You go to annual conference, there are churches who aren't there who used to be. Like, what is it that we're building, and how do you feel about that? And I don't know that I will say personally, I had wrestled with the denomination and what it was doing all along, and in the end said, I can't leave this church because there's always going to be queer kids. Whether the denomination stays more conservative or goes more liberal, there's always going to be queer kids there. And as a person whose vocation is to teach and advocate and teach others who will teach these kids, I felt convicted to stay, which means that these churches who have left, like, who's advocating for the queer kids in those churches? because it's not like queerness goes away because a church leaves a denomination when it becomes more open and affirming. So I don't know that I have an in to talk to those kids. I hope that somebody does who will tell them that they're loved and that they're wonderful and that they're not a mistake. But I would love to be able to find some of those kids and learn from them how they're navigating all this.
So my chapter is on adolescent girls and kind of the constructions of sin and confession in Catholic schools. And the way in which I frame the conversation is around some of the pressures that are put on adolescent girls from our in our society. When I first started engaging this work 10 years ago, I feel like there was more, we were on a trajectory towards understanding better the pressures that kids are under. I don't think that anymore. I think that we are in a moment of retrenchment where the expectations on teenage girls are going to be exacerbated. Like, I don't think it's going to get better for girls in the next few years. And I think that, like Emily, I hope there's a way to map those experiences in a way that is honest to those experiences and truth-telling about the pressures that girls are under. I don't know what that is yet.
I see. Oh, Lakisha, go ahead. And then I see that Annie has her hand raised. So
I wasn't going to say much at all. I was just going to throw in that for my chapter, it was just talking about kind of like this notion of safety for Black and brown bodies and how they're not really safe. How, you know, for many Black and brown bodies, they're considered dangerous and criminals, over sexualized, objectified, and they don't get a childish indiscretion. It becomes you are laying on the street. And so I don't know if there's anything I changed. I mean, it was honestly just angry because it was really just which example do I want to use? And so that was the part that was probably the hardest. Yeah.
thank you. Annie, go ahead.
So first, I just want to thank you for this, for not only for the book, but also for this presentation. And I'm feeling quite encouraged going, maybe I should dust off that book project I've been ignoring a little bit. Right, especially since I am hearing you speak about what it sounds like, if my math is right, a 7-year project, right? Which I think many need to hear over and over again, even if you've been through the process before, that this kind of takes a minute. So in that vein, I'm wondering what stopped you from saying, okay, so I'm done, and I'm just gonna hand this off just to you two, right? Whichever one. And what led to, you know, we're just gonna keep inching away and working on this.
That's a really good question. And we should say that Annie was one of the original potential contributors to this volume and was one of the people for whom life got busy and this project went to the side, which is, I think, a really common experience in these kinds of things. So no shade on Annie. It's, you know, and so there's a real kind of that ebb and flow that we were talking about. For me, there were two things that, maybe 2.5 things that kept me kept me plugging away with it. The first was a conviction that this stuff needed to get out there. And that what we were talking about was important and was going to be useful to people. And that walking away would maybe jeopardize that. The second was even when it was annoying and frustrating, I really appreciated the collaborative process, particularly with Emily and Lakisha and Jennifer. And third, and this is a small one, I needed it for my tenure process. And right, like it was something, it wasn't the only thing, obviously, it wasn't the only thing on my CV, but it was an important enough piece that I wanted to make sure that it stayed on my to-do list. I don't know if that was true for you, Emily and Lakisha.
I'll be real honest and say that I think it's because whenever I was about to bow out, I got an email from you or from Lakisha. Like, it's not just that it was a collaborative work, it's that, like, when we got told no by a publisher, like, you were like, all right, well, let's start on the next one. Let's look at the requirements for this next publisher proposal and get working. Like, I don't know that I could have continued without the fact that, I mean, I really feel like anytime that I was like losing energy, one of you all would email me.
I was gonna say same for me. It was like, because we're working on other projects, we're working on other books, other things, and it was exhausting. Like, I'm gonna just be, really, really, really honest. To sustain something like this over years, is hard work. It's exhausting work. But the work needed to be out in the world. Like, I'm seeing young people. I have my nieces and nephews. I have my two little boys, and I'm like, no, they need, like, this work needs to be in the world. Like, it needs to be made flesh, right? And so it'd be moments where, like you were saying, we'd be like, all right, so I haven't heard from da 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 da. I'm gonna take care of this, and like, it wasn't just the, oh, da 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 da. It was the, hey, how are you? And I'm gonna take care of. So it was never just one of us sending someone say, hey, do this. It was like, hey, I'm going to take care of this. What do you need? Or, hey, what else needs to be done? It was such a collaborative communal spirit that was so helpful. It wasn't, and whenever, and I guess between us in the, the editing piece, like, whenever we were just like, hey, I was like, hey, my kids are sick this week. I was like, look, it's rough. And y'all are both like, okay, we got this. Come back in when you can, or like, or vice versa, when something happened, or you got sick, or just, I mean, life. And so just knowing that it wasn't all on you, like, it wasn't all on me. That was the thing that kept me, was like, I'm in community. They got me, I got them. There are moments where I needed to pick up more. There are moments where they needed to pick up more, like where they picked up for me. And so that was the beauty of it. The work needed to be in the world. And I will say, moments where we had people that were like, we went to, that were like, the initial, hey, would you endorse something like this? Hey, would you read something like this? And to get that feedback, when they tell y'all we were literally in tears, we were literally in tears. I mean, we were like all on the call, like, just sobbing, like, okay, so this is worth, like, this is meaningful. Like, it's not just us, like our people in our guild see this, people that we look up to, that we are inspired by, whose books we use in our classes, like, they see the value in this work. And I will say that those moments of affirmation definitely got, especially some of those hard parts when people were looking at the initial draft and they're like, oh no, this is still good. And we're like, whew. It's like, okay, let me breathe for a week. Okay, now I can come back. I'm good. So I know there are, again, several of you on the call that gave those nodes of affirmation along the way. Yeah, those were helpful and necessary and needed, but it's a journey. And I don't know what you're going to write about, Annie, but if you need something, I'm happy to journey with you. You let us, community is always good.
You might regret that, Lakisha, but okay.
I mean, maybe, but I'm still gonna put that out there, because I still believe in community. Even if you just need someone to just send the calendar invites and to get the timeline, I'm good with the organizational spreadsheet.
Well, thank you to everybody who came. Thank you to our panelists, our authors and editors of this book. In the chat, you will see that you can order your own copy of Nobody's Perfect. There's a link right in the chat to order from the publisher. There's also a link to a feedback form about the session. We appreciate your feedback. And there's a link to the Padlet in the chat, which is where you can look at announcements that people have made, and you can put up your own announcements. And so with that, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate everyone who came. And I will make a plug for the next session is the Harper Award presentation. And Dr. Emily Towns is receiving the Harper Award. And she has she will be giving some remarks. And so you might not want to miss it. So I look forward to seeing everyone at the Harper Award presentation. Thank you so much.